March is Women's History Month, so I wanted to recognize a few of the many women who've made significant contributions to atmospheric science, two whose work was celebrated at the time it was done, and one whose contributions took a century to be acknowledged. Dr. Joanne Simpson, known as a pioneer of modern research on tropical clouds and hurricanes, was the first woman to receive a PhD in meteorology in the U.S. In the 1950s, she developed the first computer model of a cloud, and from 1965 to 1974 directed NOAA's Experimental Meteorology Lab in Florida, overseeing a project called Storm Fury that toyed with the idea that you could weaken hurricanes by seeding them with chemicals. Later, she led the Severe Storms Branch at NASA's Goddard Space Flight Center and was project scientist for the Tropical Rainfall Measuring Mission, a satellite launched in 1997 that carried the first spaceborne weather radar to measure rainfall across the tropics. Simpson won 4 prestigious awards from the American Meteorological Society and served as its first female president in 1989. Next, remember the ozone hole? The annual depletion of that critical gas in the stratosphere over Antarctica? Well, the atmospheric chemist who pioneered the theory explaining the ozone hole and then gathered some of the first data to help establish its cause was Dr. Susan Solomon. Now at MIT, in 1986 she led the National Ozone Expedition to Antarctica, where her team made the critical measurements that helped to establish chlorofluorocarbons, or CFCs, as the culprit in the ozone hole. That work formed the basis of the international agreement known as the Montreal Protocol that protected the ozone layer by regulating those chemicals. In 1999, Dr. Solomon received the National Medal of Science, the highest scientific honor in the U.S. The third woman I'd like to recognize reminds me of the movie Hidden Figures, about 3 female mathematicians at NASA during the space race who, at the time, didn't get the credit they deserved. Well, Eunice Foote was an amateur scientist in the mid-1800s whose experiments showed that carbon dioxide in the air could increase its temperature. This was 3 years before more advanced experiments by more famous scientist John Tyndall demonstrated what would come to be called the greenhouse effect. In a short paper entitled Circumstances Affecting the Heat of the Sun's Rays, the first known physics publication in a scientific journal by an American woman, Foote described her experiments. The receiver containing the gas, she means carbon dioxide, became itself much heated. An atmosphere of that gas would give to our Earth a high temperature, and if, at one period in its history, the air had mixed with it a larger proportion than at present, an increased temperature must have necessarily resulted. In other words, Earth would have been much warmer in the past or in the future if its CO2 levels were higher, an idea now commonly accepted. Foote died in 1888, and it took a century for her work to be rediscovered, work that is now generally accepted as the earliest known scientific research to establish the existence of greenhouse gases and their ability to influence climate. Stay tuned. Our extended forecast is next.